All right, everybody, welcome. Get ready for a deep dive into the life of a guy you might think you know. Robert Fulton.
The steamboat guy, right?
That's him. Well, kinda, sorta, but that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Wow.
This guy, Fulton, he was so much more than just boats, and we're gonna find out why.
I think what makes Fulton so interesting is that he's part of this bigger story, right? Humanity's quest to harness energy.
To tame a force of nature?
Exactly. I mean, imagine trying to control something as powerful as steam. We're talking giant, invisible forces, accidents waiting to happen, and ultimately a revolution.
Okay, so let's talk about that force of nature, that white giant, as it's called at times. Our sources paint this picture of young James Watt just totally fixated on a tea kettle. You know, that simple invention.
Right.
It's like he was watching the birth of a whole new era.
Well, he was. I mean, Watt was one of those people who saw energy where other people just saw a way to make a hot drink. The steam engine he invented wasn't just about gears and pistons and all that. It was about understanding the potential of a force that was invisible.
A game changer.
Tight end.
And once Watt sort of unleashed that white giant, as we called it, everybody wanted to put it to work. Especially for transportation.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And that's where things start to get, well, a little wacky.
Yeah.
Like you had people trying to use these giant duck feet to paddle a boat. Giant duck feet.
Sorry, did you say giant duck feet? That'd have to be quite a sight to see.
It really was.
Yeah.
And then there was this other idea about pushing water, forcing water, actually, from the bow to the stern.
To propel the boat forward.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that didn't exactly work out as planned.
Not really, no.
Huh.
But you got to hand it to these early inventors.
Oh, yeah.
They weren't afraid to experiment. They were pioneers.
Trailblazers.
Totally.
Okay, so what about John Fitch? I mean, his name pops up in our sources.
Yeah, Fitch. His story is kind of, well, it's a bit of a sad one, actually, but his vision was spot on. He used oars that were powered by a steam engine. Great idea in theory, but it just didn't work in practice. Fitch, he ended up poor. Ridiculed for his efforts, but get this, and this is a direct quote from the guy, he said, "When I shall be forgotten, steamboats will run up the rivers and across the seas." How about that for foresight?
Wow, so it's like he knew that his own failure was going to pave the way for someone else's success.
Yeah, exactly. And that someone, of course, was Robert Fulton.
All right, so let's get into Fulton's world a little bit. Our sources describe his childhood as basically one giant experiment. Like he was not a kid who wanted to sit still and read a book.
Yeah. Some people are just wired to explore and tinker and learn that way.
Totally. This is a guy who, as a kid, he made pencils for his entire school.
Really?
He was not satisfied with the pencils they had.
That's pretty impressive. You know, that shows initiative.
And then there's this other story about how he basically saved the 4th of July celebration one year because there was a candle shortage.
Right.
Everyone thought the fireworks display was going to be canceled. And so what does Fulton do? He whips up a batch of homemade rockets.
Wow. Always coming up with a solution. He even got the nickname Quicksilver Bob because he was messing around with mercury all the time.
Wait, Quicksilver? Like the liquid metal stuff?
That's the one.
Oh, wow. Okay, but here's the thing that I can't get over. As a teenager, this guy built a paddle wheel boat, not a toy. He wanted to make fishing trips easier, so he designs and builds this thing.
It's almost like his whole childhood was training for all the amazing inventions he'd come up with later on.
Totally. But here's a twist. You're not going to believe what Fulton was doing before he became the steamboat guy.
Oh, all right. Now I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Believe it or not, he was an artist. He was painting portraits and landscapes.
Wait a minute. Seriously?
He was even making a decent living from it in Philadelphia.
So he was a real artist, not just like, you know, a weekend dabbler.
No, the real deal.
Huh. That's interesting. You know, it actually tells us a lot about Fulton. He wasn't just this, you know, mechanic or engineer type. There was a whole creative side to him.
A Renaissance man.
Yeah, I like that. And you know what? It was actually his art that led him to engineering.
Wait, really? How'd that happen?
Well, it all started with this project involving canals.
Canals, huh? Okay, I'm listening.
So, back in the late 1700s, canals were basically like the superhighways.
Makes sense.
You know, they were essential for trade and moving stuff around.
Right.
And Fulton, always the innovator, he invented a system of these inclined planes to move boats up and down hills.
He was basically hacking the transportation system.
He was. And this whole canal project got him thinking about bigger challenges. And that's what led him to the invention that would make him famous.
I can't wait to hear more about that.
Well, get ready, because Fulton's world of inventions goes way beyond just steamboats.
Okay, you've got my attention. What else did this guy cook up? All right, come on, spill it. What other inventions was Fulton working on?
Okay, so get this. Fulton was really into torpedoes. He even messed around with, get this, submarine technology.
Submarines, that's like way ahead of his time.
Oh, totally. Fulton was definitely a visionary, always trying to push the boundaries. And his work with torpedoes, even though they weren't as successful as his steamboat, it actually laid the groundwork for how torpedoes were used later on, in warfare. Kind of makes you think about how inventions can have these, like, ripple effects.
Yeah, unintended consequences, right. Which kind of brings us back to Fulton's most famous creation, the steamboat. But you mentioned earlier he didn't do it alone.
Nope, he had a partner in crime, Robert Livingston. Livingston was this wealthy businessman and politician who also believed in steam-powered boats. And get this, he'd gotten something called grand rights from New York State.
Grand rights, what are those?
Think of it like this: exclusive rights to operate steamboats on all of New York's waterways.
That's a pretty sweet deal.
Oh, totally. It was like having the keys to a transportation empire, just waiting to happen.
So how did these two, Fulton and Livingston, how did they hook up?
Well, Livingston, he had the vision, the money, the political connections, but he needed someone with Fulton's engineering skills. So they partnered up, and together they decided to build a steamboat that would change the world.
And that steamboat was, of course, the Clermont, but it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it?
Funny you should say that, because their first attempt, it sank in the Seine River. Can you imagine?
Ouch, that's gonna hurt. I'd be ready to give up right there.
But Fulton, he didn't quit. He's like, nope, not giving up. He salvaged the machinery, from that sunken boat and started building a new one, the Clermont, right here in New York City.
Wow, so this iconic vessel was built right here on the East River.
Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah. And then, of course, that famous first voyage in 1807, the one that made Fulton, like, the steamboat guy.
Oh, yeah, that maiden voyage was a huge deal, not just for Fulton, but for the future of transportation. It proved that steam-powered boats, they can work. They were practical, and they had the potential to change everything.
I bet there were a lot of people who thought Fulton was nuts for even trying this.
You better believe it.
Yeah.
People were calling it Fulton's folly. But, as the Clermont went up the Hudson River, all that doubt and all that negativity, it just faded away. And the people who saw it, they realized they were watching history in the making.
I can picture it, this steamboat chugging along, smoke billowing, proving all those doubters wrong.
And you know what it shows? It shows that big innovations, they often need people to take a leap of faith.
To believe in something that seems impossible.
Exactly.
So, okay, the Clermont was a success, we get that. But how did it actually change things? What was the impact?
Oh, man. The impact was huge. Before the steamboat traveling upriver, that was a nightmare. I mean, you were basically stuck with whatever the wind and current decided to do.
At their mercy.
Totally. But with the steamboat, travel was faster, more reliable. You could actually, set a schedule. And goods could be transported much easier. That opened up trade routes, expanded markets.
It's like Fulton's steamboat shrank the world, It connected things in a way that was never possible before.
I think that's a great way to put it. And that's why he's remembered for this invention. Because it wasn't just some technical achievement. It was something that sparked economic growth. It changed society. It even helped people move westward.
And it all started with that kid who built a paddle wheel boat as a teenager. Amazing.
It is, isn't it? Sometimes the things we're drawn to as kids, they can give us clues about where we're headed.
So Fulton's steamboat was a success, but his life wasn't always easy, right?
Yeah, sadly not. He had to deal with lawsuits, people trying to steal his ideas, people trying to take credit for his work, people wanting to, cash in on his success.
Mm-hmm.
It's a reminder that being an inventor, it's not always easy.
You create something groundbreaking, and then you have to fight to protect it.
That's often the case. And sadly, Fulton's life ended way too soon. He was only 49 when he died. But his legacy, it lives on, not just in the steamboats, but in that spirit of innovation that he embodied. He showed people that you can make impossible ideas a reality if you just keep pushing, keep creating, keep believing in new technologies.
His story is an inspiration, for sure, but thinking about John Fitch, the guy whose steamboat failed, but whose vision led to Fulton's success, it makes me think about how innovation often builds on the work of others.
That's so true. And it brings to mind another innovator whose story is full of twists and turns and setbacks, but ultimately leads to something truly transformative. Ready to hear about Eli Whitney?
I'm all ears. What's the story with this Eli Whitney guy?
All right, let's talk Eli Whitney. I mean, I know the name, but to be honest, all I can really picture is a cotton gin.
Yeah.
That's what he's known for, right? The cotton gin. Yeah, that's his claim to fame. But there's a whole lot more to this story. To really get it, we need to picture the American South, like back in the late 1700s. Think, tons of cotton fields. But here's the thing. Getting those little seeds out of the cotton bolls, that was a total nightmare.
Yeah, I'm guessing there weren't any machines back then that could do it.
Nope. It was all done by hand, and it was slow, and it was boring. Like, we're talking a skilled worker could only clean about 1 pound of cotton a day. 1 pound.
Wow, so inefficient. No wonder cotton wasn't really like a big crop back then.
Exactly. It just wasn't practical. But that's where Eli Whitney comes in, and his story. It's more than just solving a problem. It's about ingenuity, ambition, and, well, the law of unintended consequences.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me about this Eli Whitney guy. What was he like?
Well, much like Fulton, he loved to tinker. He was a problem solver from a young age, Always preferred hanging out in his dad's workshop instead of doing chores on the family farm.
Sounds familiar.
Right. There are stories about him like building a violin at age 12.
Seriously?
Yeah. And it wasn't just some kid's toy either. It was so good, people were asking him to repair their instruments.
A 12-year-old violin maker. That's pretty impressive.
He was a bright kid, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's this great story about him taking apart his dad's, prized pocket watch.
Oh, no. I can imagine how that went over.
Actually, it's not what you think. Whitney was so careful, he put the whole watch back together perfectly. His dad didn't even know it was missing.
Wow. That shows, a real attention to detail.
Totally. He understood how things worked. But so how does he end up inventing the cotton gin? Well, it was kind of a lucky break, really.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So after he graduates from Yale, Whitney heads down south to Georgia. He's going to be a tutor. And it's there that he meets this woman named Catherine Green.
Catherine Green, all right. And who was she?
She was the widow of a Revolutionary War hero, and she was sharp, really interested in helping the South's economy. And she saw cotton as having huge potential, but, that seed problem was holding everything back.
I bet she was frustrated.
Totally. And so she turns to Whitney, this brilliant young guy. And our sources describe this gathering, right, at her plantation, where they're all talking about this cotton problem. And Catherine, she's so confident in Whitney, she's like, oh, ask Mr. Whitney, he can make anything.
Talk about a pressure situation.
Right. But Whitney, he takes on the challenge, even though he'd never even seen a cotton plant before.
You're kidding, right?
Nope. He goes to Savannah. He's looking everywhere for raw cotton, warehouses, docks, finally gets his hands on some. And then he basically locks himself in a basement workshop for months trying to figure this thing out.
I can picture him now surrounded by gears and levers and mountains of cotton, just working and working and working.
That's pretty much it. And finally he figures it out. That winter, he creates a working model of the cotton gin.
All right, I gotta know, how did this thing work? What was so special about it?
It's actually pretty simple when you think about it. It's like a wooden drum with these rows of wire teeth. And as the drum spins, those teeth, they grab onto the cotton fibers, pull them through a small space. A space too small for the seeds to get through.
So it was basically combing out the seeds. That's so smart.
Yeah, totally. And the impact was huge. This thing, it could clean as much cotton in a day as someone could do by hand in months.
Okay, that is game-changing. I bet everyone in the South was thrilled.
You'd think so, right?
Cool.
But here's the thing. The cotton gin, it ended up having some pretty major and pretty bad unintended consequences.
Oh, no. Okay, what happened?
Well, remember, slavery was a huge part of life in the South. And the cotton gin, it made it possible to grow and process cotton on a massive scale, which meant a huge increase in demand for slave labor.
Oh, wow. So this thing, meant to make life easier, actually made things so much worse.
It's tragic, really. Whitney might have even hoped that his invention would actually reduce the need for manual labor, but instead it just made slavery stronger.
It's a powerful reminder that even with good intentions, technology can have effects we don't anticipate.
That's for sure. So what happens to Whitney after all this? Did he at least get rich and famous from his invention?
Yeah, did he?
Sadly, no. His story is a mix of good and bad. Despite the cotton gin being a success, he had a ton of problems. People were copying his design. He was in court, constantly trying to protect his patent. He even had a factory that burned down.
What a nightmare. So this guy creates a groundbreaking invention and he can't even catch a break.
It's rough. But Whitney was tough. He kept going. And eventually he landed a contract with the U.S. government to make firearms.
Wait, firearms? That's a pretty big change from cotton gins.
It was. But through this new project, he ended up developing something truly revolutionary. Interchangeable parts.
Interchangeable parts. Wait, isn't that like a really big deal?
Huge. Think about it. Using standardized parts to build machines. That was a game changer. It made things way more efficient, cheaper, and it basically set the stage for the Industrial Revolution in America.
Wow. So even though everyone remembers him for the cotton gin, it was his work with firearms that had a massive impact on history.
Exactly. Whitney's story is all about, like, the unexpected. It shows how creative thinking, economics, and social issues, they can all get tangled up in the world of invention.
It makes me wonder how many other inventors are out there, people whose stories we don't know, whose work has been forgotten, but who changed the world just as much as Fulton or Whitney.
I think there are tons of those stories waiting to be told, and that's what we're here to do, to keep digging, to keep exploring, and to make sure those voices are heard.
Exactly. So until next time, keep that spark of curiosity burning and keep asking those questions because you never know what amazing stories are waiting to be uncovered.